before, the name of our story for this year is The Time of the Honeybee. And why, even though our story is about the meeting of the Lenape Native Americans and the Pennsylvania Dutch settlers of Maxitoni, our story doesn't start with either of these characters. Why, our story actually starts with that bear there. And that bear was out in the center of the Makunji forest. She was just waking up, and she was right out in the center of the forest. She was yawning and stretching, but it was a beautiful morning. And so she came out, but she had an itch on her back. And so she began reaching back, and she began scratching that itch on her favorite scratching post, the old dead tree. And she got that itch. It felt so good. But why? She stopped, and her nose perked up. And what do you all think she smelled? Honey! And so she followed her nose right up to the top of that tree, and she saw honey. So she began trying to get up to that top of the tree. She was stretching her arms out as far as she could, but she just couldn't reach. So she went around to the other side of the tree. Maybe she could reach it from there. But she still just couldn't reach. Oh, this wasn't working. So she began to stomp up and down around the tree. Maybe she could knock it loose. But why, just as she started to doing this, she heard laughter. And why, it was all of her forest friends who had come out of the forest, and they were laughing at her. And when she saw this, she went up to them and she began to look very sad. And she said, well, animals, why are you laughing at me? I don't like being laughed at. I thought you were my friend. And that butterfly fluttered forward and said, well, bear, you see, you're trying so hard to get the honeycomb atop the old dead tree, but everyone knows you can't get that honeycomb. If you want honey around these parts, you must go into Maxitoni and get their honey. And the bear, she talked to the rabbit about that, and the rabbit gave her a very good idea. The rabbit said, well, why don't we just go over to Maxitoni right now and get you that honeycomb? And all the animals, they all nodded their heads. They thought this was a pretty good idea. So they crept on over to Maxitoni. And when they got there, they stopped. All the animals went. And when that bear looked forward and saw that honeycomb, why, she was so happy. She ran right forward and picked up that honeycomb. She held it high over her head, but you see, she had forgotten what lives in honeycombs. What lives in honeycombs? Bees, and thousands of bees came swarming out of that honeycomb and began stinging everyone in a great big circle. They all started running in a giant circle around the old dead tree. And why, the noise of all this commotion reached down to where Mama Goose and her goslings were sleeping. And why, they heard the commotion, they broke out of their pen and they began running with everyone else. But this reached down to the settlement. And why, all of those settlers got out of their beds and they thought they were under attack. So they all began to run out with their bags of wheat and flour and their giant loaves of bread. And they began to bop everything on the head. All of the settlers got up and ran out and started bopping things on the head. And why, all of this commotion lasted for a very long time, when finally that bear got fed up with it all and said, wait, everyone, retreat! And so all of the animals, they all went running back into the forest. And why, those geese went back to their pen, and even those bees picked up their honeycomb and made sure it was right where it belonged. And those settlers, they went back into their houses, for it was still very early in the morning, and they wanted to get some more sleep. And once everyone was back and safe in their beds, why, those animals, they were still out in the forest, and they were all talking about what had just happened. They were pulling stingers out of their paws, and they were licking their wounds, and they were all out in the center of the forest. And why, they were talking about what had just happened. That owl there, she looked at all the animals and she said, oh my, did you see all of those bees? I don't think I've seen that many bees in my entire life. And that fox stepped forward and said, no, I don't think I've seen that many bees either. But you know what I did see? Why, I saw Mama Goose, and you know what I noticed about her? She was all locked up in her pen, and I don't think she liked being locked up in her pen very much. And that bear, she realized that she remembered seeing Mama Goose all locked up. And so she looked at the other animals and said, well, do you think that maybe we should go unlock her and bring her back to the forest with us? And the animals, they all liked that idea. So they went right back over to Maxitonia, and when they got there, they stopped. And they knocked on that goose pen. And Mama Goose came waddling out with her goslings right behind her. And once she saw all of those animals there, she started getting very upset. She said, animals, what are you doing here? I don't want to see you here. You made me get stung by so many bees, and it was so painful, and oh, I don't want you to be here. But that's when that butterfly fluttered forward and said, well, you see, Mama Goose, we're all very sorry about that, but we had noticed that you were all locked up with your goslings, and we thought maybe you'd like to come back to the forest with us. And Mama Goose, she looked and she thought about this a bit, but she had to talk this over with her goslings, so they all got in a huddle, and they all started whispering. And they whispered for a very long time. Why, they chuckled, and then they frowned. And after a very long time of all of this whispering, they all turned back to the animals, and Mama Goose said, well, animals, we've talked this over, and actually I think we all are very much so for going into the forest, where there would be fresh water and open fields. We all think it sounds quite nice, actually. And with that, the animals opened up the goose pen. They opened up the goose pen, and Mama Goose and her goslings went waddling after them all the way back to the forest. But the very next morning, as all of those settlers were waking up, they yawned and stretched, and they were going out to feed their prized geese, when they realized something was terribly wrong. Why, their geese had gone missing, and they began looking around everywhere, desperately trying to find those geese. They were looking high in the haylofts, they were looking low in the horse stalls, but their geese were nowhere. So that beekeeper screamed, quickly, out into the fields, they must be out there. So they all ran outside and began looking in between bushes, in between trees, under their own hats, why, under their very own feet. But all they could do is start spinning in circles, for their geese were nowhere to be found. But soon Otto Schmidt looked at the rest of them and said, oh, all of you, you know what? Our geese, they must already be into the Blue Mountains by now. I doubt they're anywhere around here. Should we go in the Blue Mountains and look for them? And all the settlers nodded their heads. And so they all went back into their houses to grab their pickaxes and their trusty iron cooking pot. And Otto Schmidt even grabbed his trusty iron cooking pot. And when all the settlers were ready to set out, they started off. And now, if any of you have ever been in the Blue Mountains before, you know how they go. Why, at first, the land's all very flat, and you get off to a pretty good pace. But as you get higher and higher in that mountain, soon you have to dig your pickaxes deep into the stone and lift your legs high into the air to get over the rocks. And all of this is very tiring work. And soon those settlers grew more and more hungry and more tired. And so soon they all stopped and looked into Otto Schmidt's iron cooking pot to see what he had brought for them. And what was in his iron cooking pot? Why, nothing! He had forgotten to bring all the food! And all the settlers just put their hands on their hips and wagged their fingers at him. Otto Schmidt, how could you do this to us? But Otto Schmidt just looked back at them and said, well, you see, well, we didn't really have that much food in the settlement in the first place, so there really wasn't anything for me to bring. I'm sorry, guys. And with that, there was nothing all those settlers could do but clutch their stomachs and crumple down on the mountain, for they were so hungry. And why, there is a very good chance that those settlers would have died there on the mountain if it had not been for the medicine woman who was gazing into her fire. And why, she saw in her fire all of those settlers dying out on the mountain. And when she saw this, she turned to her maidens and her brave and said quickly, "Maidens brave, we must help the settlers or they will die. Stand up, all of you." And so they all went out onto the mountain and helped those settlers to their feet and brought them all back to their camp. So all the settlers, they got up, they followed them back to the camp. And all the settlers stood facing the Lenny Lenape, especially Otto Schmidt. And all the settlers stood facing the Lenny Lenape. And why, those Lenny Lenape gave them much food and water, and why, the settlers were all feeling a whole lot better. When Otto Schmidt turned to that medicine woman and said, "Medicine woman, you've been so kind to me and my people. Why, I would like to give you my iron cooking pot in return." And so Otto Schmidt handed the medicine woman his iron cooking pot, and she thanked him. And then the medicine woman turned to the settlers and said, "Well, settlers, I've realized something. You've got no food at your settlement, nor did you have any with you. And so I would like to give you my 3 sisters to use as food for the winter." And when all the settlers heard this, they gasped, "Oh, medicine woman, we don't want your 3 sisters. That's horrible. How could you say such a thing?" And the medicine woman just smiled and said, "I don't mean human sisters. I mean the 3 sisters of corn, bean, and pumpkin squash." And with that, the Lenny Lenape handed those settlers baskets filled with seeds. And those settlers were so happy, they were just about to get up and leave. When why, that bread baker there with the white hat, he remembered something. And he turned back to the Lenny Lenape and he said, wait, I just remembered why we were up in the mountain in the first place. You see, we've lost our geese, and we were wondering if maybe you could help me find them. We'd really all appreciate it." And the medicine woman nodded her head. She said, "Well, of course I can help you find your geese. But first, I need you to rush back to Maxitoni and plant those seeds, wasting no time." And with that, those settlers were so happy, they thanked the Lenny Lenape and they went skipping all the way back to Maxitoni. And they were all true to their word. They wasted no time to go out into the fields and start planting the 3 sisters. Why, they worked the ground for days, digging their pickaxes into it and throwing the seeds on the ground. But it just seemed it wouldn't rain, so all they could do is go back into their houses and hope that it would. But now the medicine woman was also being true to her word. The medicine woman was out in the center of the Blue Mountains, and she faced to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. And it's all right, I don't know where north is either. She was calling on the spirits of the 4 winds, and when a breeze passed her way, that bear came lumbering out of the forest. And once that bear got up to her, the medicine woman turned to her and said, "Bear, something tells me you might know what happened to the settlers' geese. Do you know what's happened?" And that bear was just about to say yes, when she remembered something. And she said, "Well, medicine woman, I might know what happened to the settlers' geese, but I'm so hungry, why, I just don't think I could remember right now." And that medicine woman, she knew what that bear was up to. But she said, "All right, if I can get you the honeycomb atop the old dead tree, can you bring back the settlers' geese?" Oh, and that bear, she nodded her head, and she was so happy, she ran back to her animal friends to tell them the wonderful news. And the medicine woman, she went back to the Lenny Lenape, and she looked at them and she said, "Everyone, gather close, I've got something important to tell you." And they all gathered close, and she looked at them and she said, "Well, you see, I've got a bit of a challenge for you. For we have to try to knock down that honeycomb atop the old dead tree, only using our spears. Do all of you think you can do it? And they all nodded their heads. They gave a resounding yes, for they were all very confident. And with that, the medicine woman got up and led them all out in front of the old dead tree, where they stood in a shoulder-to-shoulder line. And once they were all in this line, why, those geese and even those animals came right on out to try and see what was going on. For this was all very interesting. And they all went and they stood behind the Lenny Lenape. And they were all at a very safe distance behind the Lenny Lenape, when the medicine woman raised her arms up high in the air. And she said, all right, you all remember how to hold your spears, don't you? You hold them just like this. And they were all holding their spears just the right way. When she said, all right, when I drop my arms, let your arrows, your spears fly and knock down that honeycomb. So she dropped her arms, the spears went flying. And they got that honeycomb on the first try. A round of applause. And that bear, when she saw the honeycomb fall, she ran up to it. She held it high over her head. But she had forgotten what lives in honeycombs. What lives in honeycombs? Bees, and thousands of bees came swarming out of that honeycomb. And they began stinging everyone and chasing them in a great big circle, all in the same direction. And why, this lasted for a very long time, and the noise had reached down to where the settlers were in Maxatoni. And why, they looked out their windows and they saw the honking and the squawking and the stinging. And why, those settlers thought they were under attack. And so they ran out and they started bopping everything in sight on the head. They all ran out of their homes and started bopping things on the head. And that medicine woman, she got so tired of all of this, she ran up to the tallest step and she said, all right, everybody stop. And with that, everyone froze in some very silly positions. And she looked down at Otto Schmidt and she said, Otto Schmidt, get up here. Now, why on earth were you attacking me and my people? What were you doing? And Otto Schmidt looked back at her and said, well, we weren't attacking you. You were the ones attacking us. And the medicine woman, she just looked taken aback. Otto Schmidt, we were not attacking you. We were just trying to return your geese. And with that, Otto Schmidt looked down and saw where Mama Goose and her goslings were standing. And he was so happy, he ran right down to them and gave them all great handshakes. And all the other settlers, when they saw those geese, they were so happy, they all also ran over and started giving them all handshakes. But why, this is when the medicine woman, she looked down to see where the three sisters were planted. And she walked down to them. And she realized, why, they weren't growing. And when she saw this, she turned to Otto Schmidt and said, Otto, didn't you plant the seeds like I asked you to? What's going on here? And Otto looked back and said, well, you see, we all planted the seeds, but there's been no rain. Seeds won't grow without rain. But the medicine woman, she knew what to do about this. She said, all right, everyone, we must do a rain dance. Quickly, everyone, over to this side of Maxatoni. And everyone get in a great big circle. So everyone gathered in a humongous circle that fit every single person in it. She then said, all right, everyone turn to your right, which is this way. Now dance to the drums in a step hop pattern. And so they all began, step hop, step hop. But soon that beekeeper said, stop, 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 everybody stop, stop. We settlers, we don't know this dance. You see, the only dance that we know is the polka. And the medicine woman looked back and said, well then, everyone, let's polka. And so everyone began linking arms, and they all started doing the polka. They were all linking arms and jumping up and down and clapping their hands. They all started doing the polka. and thicker and thicker. And why, it wasn't very much of this polka until thousands of lightning bolts crashed out of the sky. And then, oh, don't stop dancing, it hasn't started raining yet. And then down from the heavens came brothers Thunder and Lightning. And they danced down among all the people. And with them they brought rain. And rain poured down on all the people and on the three sisters. And when this life-giving rain hit the sisters, they began to grow, reaching their leaves high into the air. And when everyone saw this, they turned to the sisters and they gave out a great big cheer. And then everyone turned to the audience and gave a great big bow to thunderous applause. For that is the end of our story. Oh, another bow, for such fabulous actors and actresses. And that is why, to this day, Pennsylvania has the sweetest corn. Another